Hi, my name is Alex Waterhouse and we're here today at TCH Sheffield and we're going to run through a little warm-up flow. So the idea of a warm-up is to get you primed for climbing, get you ready to try hard, but most importantly, keep you safe while you're on the wall. This is not a prescriptive thing, this is just like what I've developed over the years. And it's changed throughout the time, but this is pretty much what I've settled on at the moment. So I start off with some nice kind of yoga, flexibility activation work, move into some kind of priming myself with a band, some shoulder work, and then jumping on a fingerboard to make sure my fingers are nice and primed. And then I go into some easy climbing. So, when I started doing yoga, I didn't think very much of it. I'd normally just sort of walk in and crack on. But I have to say, having spent a little bit of time getting used to it, finding myself a consistent flow, I find it like one of my favorite parts of my session. So it has kind of the obvious benefit of like getting yourself primed and active and ready to move. But I think more importantly, it gives you a chance to check in with your body at the beginning of the session and like in a really consistent way. So once you've done it for a week or so and you do the same kind of thing every day, you'll get a really good sense for how your body is feeling and like what's tight, what's struggling, how good your connection is with stuff, how strong you're feeling even, I think can get a relatively good sense. So today, for example, even just in these first like few moves, I'm feeling maybe not very flexible, like a bit stiff. Like I had a long drive yesterday, so I can feel that in my body. But I also feel quite strong, quite stable in my shoulders and stuff. So just like kicking back into that shoulder stretch felt quite pleasant. And I do have a set flow when I'm going through stuff, but I also feel it out and have quite a flexible approach when I'm doing it. Like I have the same steps. Like it's sort of based off the sun salutation to begin with. And like when I first did this, I just started, I Googled it, I think, and then I followed like a 10-minute, 15-minute sun salutation yoga flow off of YouTube. I just did that for a week. And then I pretty much remembered that. So did that as my base and then added stuff, took it away. And it became quite therapeutic to run through the same thing. Yeah, like my hamstrings are not very flexible today, but I can just work into it slowly. So over time, I've just added bits one by one, taking them off when I didn't feel like they were necessary anymore. If I felt like I was not very flexible in a certain position, I would add a little bit of my yoga flow. And because that was every single day, without even thinking about it, I sort of got more flexible in the positions I was trying to. Step round. Okay. You can see all the way around. And I generally sort of have varying levels of attention in my warm-up depending on what kind of day it is. When I was warming up for comps, I'd always be like totally focused. During this point would be like a full meditative practice. Like I would not be thinking about anything else. I would just be like feeling myself in my body. And that's when I climb at my best, when I'm like fully connected like that. I think I've tried to make more and more sessions have that level of focus. And I think that's one of the most important parts about the warm-up that I think is under thought about, is that it's like a routine that gets you into the practice of trying hard. So it's pretty obvious that it gets your body primed. And like I feel a total difference when I get on the wall without being warmed up. A decent chunk of that comes from not being warmed up in fingers and shoulders, like body, all of that. But I think a bigger part of it is I'm just not prepared to try hard in the same way as I would be after spending 20 minutes, half an hour, just really focusing my body and like building myself up. That like routine becomes like a practice to get yourself ready to try hard. Comps especially force you to do this because you have to be ready to go at a set time. They'll tell you at 12:10 you're about to go out to what could be the hardest body of your life, and it matters. So you have to be ready to do it. So it becomes very important to get fully warmed up. Most other sessions are a bit more relaxed than that, which is nice. So it's also a really good time to address any kind of like prehabby stuff. So I've had a sort of back injury for a while, where if I don't warm it up appropriately or I don't do enough work on it over some time, it tends to spasm out and get inflamed. So now, once I had that the first time, I added a few pieces into my warm-up to help prevent that, so I can be fully warmed up for a specific thing. So if you've got any injuries or any kind of niggles that you're working through, this can be a really good time to add in a little bit of rehabby stuff, or just like making sure that part of your body is extra prepared for your session. So depending on the day and how I feel, I'll add in or take away parts of it. I'm never like beholden to a single practice. Just today I actually feel quite flexible and quite sort of in my body quite quickly. So I feel like I don't need to go for a really long time on this. But sometimes if I'm feeling particularly stiff or tired or like not moving very well, then I'll add just a little bit of extra yoga in. Today I feel quite nice. I think one mistake people make with their climbing warm-up is to make it too climbing focused. Too much about the fingers and shoulders and forget about the rest of the body. It is very much a full body sport. And I started to get a lot more benefit out of my sessions when I treated it as such. At the end of this yoga bit, I actually add in some focused like activation work of different parts of the body. So I've had some knee injuries in the past, and I added a few hamstring activations in order to get that ready. In an ideal world, any boulder I pull onto, every part of my body will be ready for that when I get there. But a lot more of that will be, a lot more of the climbing stuff will get done in the next section. Whoa. So you can also add in some like self-massage stuff at this point. So I normally have like a lacrosse ball or golf ball or something. I just massage any bits that feel particularly sore. Anything where you've got like a niggle or like a sore bit or a tight point, you can work through that with some self-massage. I actually feel quite good today, so I don't feel like I need to get into any of that, which is nice. So yoga is done. Now we're going to move on to some band and kind of finger activation work. So all you're going to need for this is a resistance band and a little portable fingerboard. Resistant bands you can get basically anywhere, and they come in a lot of different resistances. I tend to not go very heavy and would err on the side of a lighter band. You can always fold it over more times and use a shorter amount of it in order to get more, but it's very hard to get less if the easiest thing is too tight. And then I also use a portable fingerboard for finger curls. You can pick these up in the Hangar shop, and yeah, should be lots of options available with that. So yeah, we'll do a little bit of band work. I do a round of shoulder work with this blue band, and then I do some finger curl stuff with the same band, or possibly some weights if I've got them, to get my fingers primed. Moving through that range of motion I find really kind of prepares me to load them later on. So start the band stuff. So I have it folded over halfway, but it can totally depend on your level, what band you use and how much you fold it over. It shouldn't feel very hard. It should feel like a mix between a stretch and activation. But we run these through kind of range of motion. Getting to the end and sort of climbing is very much about your strength and your abilities in the end range of motion. So that is where you'll want to focus a little bit more of your warm-up time, because that's also where you're most likely to get injured. But just sort of, you can find plenty of specifics of band work to do. This is just what I've settled on. So I do pretty much all of my band work as a single set. And by the end, definitely feel a bit of a burn. It's not like too tiring, but it definitely is a little bit of a fight to get all the way through it. Yeah, so with any band work, you can make it more difficult or less difficult by changing the amount of band you got. So I've just stood on it here, and that's a bit hard for me. So I'll just give myself another couple of inches down there. Perfect. And you can change during a set if you need to. Generally reps of about 8 to 10 of stuff. It's good for a warm-up level. I sort of mix and match a little bit these days. I have had, when I started doing this, I had the whole thing written out in my training diary. So every day I would look at the training diary and I just follow the list down. And I actually think that's a really good way of starting. It helps you not miss stuff, get in a routine. But after around, it must have been about 6 months of that, I just started doing it by feel and by eye, always making sure that I got a thorough warm up for every single session, but never quite as prescriptive as those earlier sessions. But now I've been doing it for long enough where it just feels like routine. And it's also nice if you're not kind of, if you have a session where you're not feeling it quite so much. So I got this a lot while I was training hard. You'd have days when you were tired, and you'd have days where it felt less good or it was cold or whatever. But just having the set routine where you don't even have to think about it, and you can try without having to put too much brain power into it. You can just slowly build through that. And quite often it would be a case of, right, I feel horrible. I'm just gonna do the warm up today, and then I'll see how I feel from there. And then by the time I got to the end of the warm up, I was feeling great and loving the session. So it can be a really nice way of getting yourself prepared for that. Finger curls, so I use a 20mm edge, which might get some chalk in a second. Very exciting. Time the session for chalk, glorious. So I just stretch a band through. And then just feeling where the pressure is on the floor. Maybe a little much to start with. Can be quite, I just go from kind of full open hand up into a nice high full crimp, where your thumb will be able to go over, back down. So this doesn't feel hard. I don't feel like I'm pulling super hard, but I can start to sort of get inside each of my fingers and feel the joints and feel the muscles tensing up. So I've been through various iterations of this. I used to do it just on a fingerboard with my feet on the ground, which is great. So if you've only got a fingerboard, you've not got a little portable thing. That can be a really good way to start. Doing this too heavily, so doing maximal reps of this is not very safe. Moving through range of motion with your pulleys and your ligaments and stuff is not a very good idea. However, doing it in a light way is I think a really good way of protecting yourself against those kind of movements in the session. A lot of injuries happen when people are coming from, say, a drag, and then they're trying to bump up into a half crimp, or they go from a full crimp and they drop down into a drag or something. So having a little bit of preparation in that range of movement makes me feel a lot safer. Again, you can modulate how hard this is just by moving where the band is on your feet. You can stretch it over one more time if it's a lighter band. You can also use weights and a loading pin. So start with only just a couple of kilos and then work up from there. There's infinite variations of this you can do. So drag with just 3 fingers all the way up into a full crimp. I can also work on, like, maybe not curls, but just some hangs of individual pairs of fingers, or even single fingers. Again, warming up each finger individually and getting the joints and the pulleys and stuff prepared without ever trying really hard. It should never feel like tweaky or like you're pulling really, really hard. We can do that on the fingerboard in a minute, in a controlled way, hanging above, using body weight. Half an hour to an hour spent at the beginning of every session can pay dividends in the long run in terms of how much climbing you're able to do. Cool, so these are feeling pretty good. I feel kind of nice. I feel like I'm ready to jump on a fingerboard. And we'll do a little bit of fingerboarding before jumping into some nice easy climbing and then ramping into the session. So we're over at the fingerboards now. I feel pretty activated. My body feels pretty loose-goosey and ready to go. But now we're going to focus on the fingers. And These to me feel like the most likely thing to get injured, and also a lot of the time the weakest link in my climbing, so I spend a little bit of extra time here. The reason I warm up on a fingerboard rather than just doing some easy climbing is that I find a fingerboard much easier to control the kind of the progression throughout the warm-up. So I don't find myself jumping for a crimp and feeling uncomfortable. I can just slowly build up the weight and drop off when I feel like I need to. I'm not trying to do a fingerboard session here. I've never got set weights for what I'm trying to work with, or I never like work through too quickly. I just do it entirely based off a feel of how my fingers are feeling in that moment. So I'll just push it just a little bit all the way through until I feel like I'm pretty much ready to go. So not just fingers here, but sort of scapular hanging stuff. So I start with some shoulder shrugs. So, shoulder shrug is from a nice engaged position all the way down, and then up again, squeezing shoulder blades together. So this is like one of the more likely methods for injury, catching something out of engagement and then reeling it back in. Actually, I found since I started doing those, my shoulders have actually felt stronger on the wall as well. Combination of that and a lot of other training, but just it's nice to wake those kind of movements up in the session. So I actually do one-arm ones as well. Again, depending on your level, this may or may not be necessary, but and then finish those rounds. Just a couple of pull-ups. So pretty much everything that I'm doing here, you can scale to your level that you find appropriate. The point isn't to follow exactly what I'm doing, but to get a sense for the general shape of the warm-up and then find your own progressions through it. So on all of the fingerboard hangs, starting easier than you even think it should be, and then only when you feel confident with that moving forward. For me, I've done a lot of fingerboarding, I've done a lot of training, my fingers are relatively strong, so I'll go from the bigger holds to like bodyweight hangs on 20 mil edges quite quickly, and maybe quicker than a lot of you guys will do. So don't follow the exact set of hangs that I do, but just know that everything is built in with the progression, and like starting on, which I will also be doing. So like this for me feels quite easy, having done a load of finger curls and done the hangs already. When you're hanging a fingerboard, always make sure you're like in a nice engaged shoulder position. So that is, you should have an orange sized gap in between your shoulder and your ears. You should never be down like this. You should always be up in engaged position. So that's another helpful point of the scapular stuff, retractions that we did at the beginning. Helps make the rest of the fingerboarding a lot safer. Maybe I would do a few more of them sometimes, but this time my fingers actually feel like they're feeling quite relaxed. So, do my first hang on the 20 mils. So I'm just counting in my head. I'm generally working between 8 and 12 seconds for the earlier hangs. Maybe for some stuff later on when I go a bit harder, I might bring that time down a little bit, make it a bit more maximal and recruitment focused. But for now, I'm just trying to slowly warm up all the joints and muscles. And actually that first hang, and it always does, felt quite hard for me. So I'm doing these first hangs in half crimp. I feel like half crimp is a really good utility position. So that's all fingers bent at 90 degrees. Well, front through, my pinky's actually at straight. But. So during the warm-up, I'll also do some drag stuff, where I'll be 3-finger open. I'll do some chisel. I'll also, just towards the end, start to warm up my full crimp with that kind of high angle of attack on the fingers, on some smaller holds, but that's actually probably the last thing I do before I go onto the climbing wall, because I know it's going to happen there. So in general, I keep the rest times quite short here. They're never maximal, but I'm trying to get a little bit of blood flow and just start to get everything moving. When you're training your fingers for strength, you always want to keep like a reasonable chunk of time in between, but we're not training here, we're just getting prepared for the climbing. So I'm actually going to do some drag stuff. So drag, just 3-finger open. Same again, aiming for about 10 seconds. Then we'll do some full crimp on here. So some people will disagree. I quite like doing some full crimp at the start of the session because I can do it in a really controlled way. Oh, yeah. See, I'd rather not be in that situation where that kind of screaming of the joints and fingertips and stuff happens on the wall, because in that case I could do it in a super controlled way. I could load it up really slowly and they could step off whenever I felt like it. If I get into a situation on a boulder where I'm pulling harder than I would expect, that feels to me like it's a bit more dangerous. So cool, so fingers nice and warm. And now we are over at a section of climbing wall to start the fun bit. It's all fun. But starting off with some nice easy climbing, well below my limit. And then building up through the grades until I'm like, feel like I'm working pretty hard. Whoa. So I'm gonna climb a boulder and get in there. The first time pulling on the wall is always like, always feels weird. I've been climbing for 15 years and I still feel uncomfortable when I first pull on. Oh yeah, and that's why we need to focus on foot placements, because that was very bad. Cool. The interest of time, I try to rest a little bit less during this than I normally would in a session. You should be on boulders that are fairly steady for you. There we go, that's why I'm focusing on nice, comfortable footwork. I like to be quite bouncy at my warm-up, because I find when I'm climbing my best, that's how I want to climb. I'm like springing about like a young gazelle. I just feel really hard. Oh. That were really tricky. Key things I'm looking for in a warm-up on the wall. I'm trying to sort of prepare my climbing technique, so climbing really well. I'm trying to build up slowly through the grades and not try too hard too soon. And then I'm just trying to have a bit of fun, trying to let myself go. Oh, another red. I feel like I'm definitely starting to get into it now. Oh yes, the first fall of the session. Freedom, I'm liberated. Oh, I shouldn't have fallen off that. Rubbish. It's okay to fall off. It's okay to fall off. It's not okay to fall off twice though. There you go. Now I feel like I'm trying. So I'm gonna work up to about my max level of boulders or just below. Not necessarily focused on sending stuff, but pulling moves that are hard. I wanna be nice and recruited. So my next session is actually gonna be on the kilter board. So that ends up being quite intense on the body and on the fingers and stuff. So I would like to be in or around fully warmed up before I start that. So. Oh. Whew. Cool. Give a brush. Oh, God. Well, the first few moves felt a lot better. I'm definitely moving. 2 minutes rest, then go again. I actually feel like this might be the warm-up proj. Once I finish this boulder, I'm probably gonna be ready to pull. Oh, cool. Nice. I think I'm pretty much ready to get on with whatever I want to get on with. So right now that's going to be going on the kilter board. It could mean trying to project some harder boulders. It could mean doing whatever training you want to do, or just actually just enjoying your session and climbing some cool blocks. But now I feel like I'm safe to pull. I feel like I'm ready to pull. And I feel like I've got the most potential in my body to try as hard as I can today. So, hopefully you've learned something. Again, this is not to be prescriptive. This is not to say you should do all of these things, but this is just what I do and what I like, and sort of the things I'm thinking about, and the general structure. So I hope you've enjoyed. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to give me a message on Instagram, or talk to the guys at the Hangar. They'll give you some really good advice. But yeah, hope you enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one.